On today's episode of Phinside The NFL, we've got Ryan Roberts here for a post-draft follow-up. We're going to ask him, between Chop Robinson and Jaylen Wright, did the Miami Dolphins potentially draft Rookie of the Year candidates on their respective sides of the football? Did the Miami Dolphins overreach on potential and not day one impact players? Plus, we'll get his thoughts on some of the UDFAs of the Dolphins draft class that they brought in that he did film work on. We got a lot to talk about, a lot to dive into, so smash the like button, subscribe if you're new. As always, let's get into this.
Loses the football. Touchdown! Got it!
You have got to be kidding me.
Jaylen Waddle has a Dolphin touchdown. And he will score!
Field on the near side, that open. Touchdown! The run from Tua Tagovailoa.
Touchdown!
He's going deep. He's going up for the touchdown again. Beautiful day to be a Dolphin fan. Let's go!
What is good, Finn Nation? What's good? It's your boy Reese, and we're back here for another one. And I am joined for a second time in less than a month by Ryan Roberts. And we're here to talk about the results of the draft. I mean, we had you on pre-draft. Now we're going to have you on post-draft. I want to break down this draft class and get your thoughts on them, and maybe even some of the UDFAs too. But before we do, man, I got to say, now you're like, what? You're 2 weeks into the 2025 class. You're
man.
Totally wound down from 2024. How did the draft night go for you? I know Penix surprised a lot of people and stuff like that. But
Sure.
Overall, what were your main takeaways from the 3 days of the draft?
I mean, like, first round specific, it wasn't anything crazy. It was like that weird window between like 8 and like 16 that some weird stuff started happening, right? Where you're just like, I didn't see that one coming. But for the most part, it was relatively consistent, at least to the types of players that I thought teams were looking at, the positions of importance, obviously, for most of the teams. It was just kind of that weird window. The only other thing that really kind of threw me off as far as the first round was I thought there was going to be a lot of movement in like the top 10 to 15 picks. I thought there was going to be a lot of trades. There wasn't. We saw more trades near like the end of the first round, and then obviously into day 2 and so forth from there. But I mean, it was mostly pretty tame, man. I mean, it's the same every single year. There's a couple picks in the first round. They're just like, where the heck did that come from? And then day 2 and day 3 are kind of, it's always the drop watch, who's dropping and why are they dropping, right? So like, but it was relatively ordinary, it's just, you kind of get used to it every single year, man. It's kind of the same storylines, if like every single draft process at this point.
Were you shocked that Newton and Powers Johnson, I mean, for Dolphin fans, dropped into the second round the way they did?
I wasn't. So I actually, I put out a thing right after the combine, and I think I mentioned it briefly on the show that I was on with you. I know the internet was glitchy and awful, but I wasn't shocked about Johnny Newton at all, Jer'Zhan Newton, because everything I had heard around the combine is there was some people that just had a lot of major question marks about him, and not so much. The size is always going to be a little bit of just a conversation point, right? He's a little bit of a smaller dude as far as height and length, and the threshold argument is always going to be there. But he was a guy that I've been hearing multiple whispers about. There's just some questions of like the coachability stuff, right? So I actually put that out at College Sports Wire on USA Today right after the combine. And I kind of said, like, I think that he's a guy that could potentially drop. Now, I thought it was going to be more drop into like the late 20s, early 30s, not so much 35. But he was a guy that there was just some work ethic questions or like coachability questions that were kind of out there. So I thought he would be a dropper. we had heard a little bit about Jackson Powers-Johnson like a week or two before the draft started, just because there was some past like durability concerns that were there, like a medical recheck type of stuff. So wasn't overly shocked about either one. I didn't think Johnny would quite make it out of the first round, but I did think he would drop a little bit compared to where he probably should have been picked, which is probably a top 20-ish player. You know what I mean? So a little bit of a drop.
A couple other things here. Notre Dame fan, you shocked that Vegas drafted Bowers when they had drafted Michael Mayer last year?
Yeah, that was like I said, like that was that weird little window of picks where I'm just like, look, I accepted it recently. I was just like, all right, Brock Bowers is what's that?
Brock Bowers going to the wasteland of Aiden O'Connell.
Well, I mean, you always feel bad for him, right? But you're at that point though. I'm just like number 13 overall. Do you want to reach for an offensive tackle, which they could have? I mean, literally, I think I believe Fuaga went the pick after, right, to the Saints, I think at number 14. So like they could have went offensive tackle there and it would have made a lot of sense for them because they needed right tackle. But I think they picked the best player available at 13. And I think that's who Brock Bowers was. So in value, I think that it made sense. But then when you add it into the fact that they just drafted Michael Mayer last year, and Michael Mayer, when he was targeted as a rookie, looked pretty dang good for the Raiders, right? So now you're like, okay, are they running a heavy 12 personnel system? Are they playing Brock Bowers as a big slot? Like, who the heck knows at this point, right? So it is the Raiders, man. They're one of those teams historically. They throw wrenches into drafts where you're just like, I don't know where that came from. Darius Hayward Bays of the world. Like, you're just like, okay, sure. The Raiders picked. It's something weird, right? So they always do that type of stuff.
Listen, I wanted to ask you this about too, just if you had talked to anyone. Actually, I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this. Do you have any idea why Carolina moved up one spot from 33 to 32 to take Xavier Legette? Because listen, one of my podcasting partners for my Thursday show, Neil Driscoll, he's locked in Baltimore and with people in Baltimore, and he heard we were trying to move up to 30. Now, I theorized it was for Xavier Legette. He's theorized it was for Tyler Guyton.
Okay.
Have you heard anything about why Carolina moved up one spot from? Because listen, you can't sit here and sell me that they traded assets just to move up one spot for Xavier Legette just for the 5th-year option. You know what it reminds me of? You remember when Tampa Bay moved up one spot for Tristan Wirfs because we were sniffing around? Remember, we were sniffing around San Fran because we wanted Wirfs too, and they moved up one spot and it ended up being Javon Kinlaw. They didn't want to fall out of range for Javon Kinlaw, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea why Carolina moved up one spot? And what were your thoughts about Buffalo continuously moving back off for giving the team they can't beat Xavier Worthy, then giving Xavier Legette, and then selling on Keon Coleman? So two-sided thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it's a really fascinating conversation, right? Because I haven't talked to anybody associated with Carolina, so like I don't know this. This is me purely making a hypothesis here. I think that there was a heavy demand on wide receiver there. Nobody really knew who 32 was going to be, right? As far as is it going to be, because everyone thought Buffalo was going to be in the wide receiver market, which they ultimately were when they traded back one spot, right? But the question was it going to be someone like Legette? Was it going to be Keon Coleman? Was it even going to be a Ladd McConkey type of receiver? Like, who's that guy going to be? And I think that what number 31 to the San Francisco did when they took Ricky Pearsall out of nowhere, they were kind of like, I think they just rose the demand to wide receiver, and they're just like, okay, well, if I need to make sure I can get my guy, I need to move up one spot because I don't want somebody else to jump me at 33 and get the guy that I potentially want. So I think that was more of Panthers knowing their guy. I mean, at the end of the day, we'll see if it works out, but they clearly thought Xavier Legette was their guy, and I don't think they wanted anyone else with the wide receiver demand on the board to jump up to 32 to jump in front of them to get the guy they wanted. So that's kind of my hypothesis about it. I could be completely wrong, but that's just kind of like reading the tea leaves, especially what happened in front of you. We saw a little bit of a run on wide receivers. Obviously, you mentioned Kansas City moving up to 28 to take Xavier Worthy, and then Ricky Pearsall pick kind of comes out of nowhere a little bit, right? That was one of the biggest surprises, man. I couldn't believe it because, like, dude, I went on a San Francisco podcast after that, and I'm just like, I don't mind Ricky Pearsall, man. Like, he's a pretty good football player. He's a good route runner. He's better after the catch than people give him credit for. He's pretty fast and explosive. But like pick 31, like, nah, man, like that's just too heavy. It's too rich, right? So I think that pick though made some teams kind of try to buoy up to get number
Mm.
32 to make sure they got their guy. And Carolina thought Xavier Legette was their guy. I personally would have maybe valued a wide receiver or two above Xavier Legette at 32, but that was who Carolina likes, right? I think it's going to be really interesting with the Buffalo conversation because I am higher on Keon Coleman than a lot of people, right? Like first
Okay.
and foremost, I like
Yeah.
Keon Coleman. So I think that ended up actually, they got some draft capital to move back a couple spots, and they could have, I think they still got a guy that has tremendous potential as one of the youngest wide receivers, maybe the youngest wide receiver in the 2024 NFL draft. So we'll see if it works out, but obviously Buffalo thought that they can move back a little bit to and still get a guy that they like in Keon Coleman. It was a fascinating trade, though, to your point of, I don't know if the Kansas City Chiefs is a team that I would trade with if I'm the Buffalo Bills with what's been happening in the playoffs the last couple of years. But clearly they thought that they could move back a little bit and still be in a good value of getting a guy that they like at 34.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, why try to give them, and I don't think he will be Tyreek, but why give them any shot, right? You know what I mean? All right, so let's get to the Dolphins here. Two players in this draft I thought had the highest ceilings, not only at their respective positions, but in the draft altogether, were Amarius Mims and Chop Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on the Chop pick? Now, a couple things behind it. Omar Kelly, who writes for the Miami Herald, said he talked to an AFC executive. They had a top 12 grade on Chop Robinson. I really believe it was. I really believe even if Troy Fautanu was on the board, they were going Chop Robinson. That's what I've been led to believe. Like Miami had a top 15, top 18 grade on Chop when they came to picking here. Well, what are your thoughts on the Chop Robinson pick? What do you think the Miami? Because I know you've already been on record saying you think if there's one guy you're going to bet on from this edge class to get 10 sacks in year one, it's Leatu Latu, and you're not going to hear any argument from me as long as he stays healthy.
Sure.
What are your thoughts of Chop Robinson starting off this year? No Bradley Chubb, and he might not be back till November, December. Jalen Phillips might be back to start training camp, but so you might have Chubb. So you might have Chubb out with Phillips, Shaq Barrett, and we'll get to the other pick later. And Chop Robinson being your top three in your rotation. What are your thoughts on Chop in year one? And what are your thoughts on the pick at 21? Is it too rich for you?
It was a little rich for me. It's a very boomer bust pick. There's no doubt about it, right? I mean, so like as an evaluator, I always like betting on traits on the edge. That is one thing that I always recommend to people. That is a position that some of my early misses in my scouting career were not putting enough value into the traits aspect. I kind of fell more towards the technical and the hand play and the pass rush plan. And like all those things are very important, but they're also teachable things, right? Like you can't teach Chop to be a 4-4 athlete. Like he just has it, right? Like he just has that type of explosiveness to him. Now, that being said, it is a boomer bust pick, though, because there is a reality where Chop Robinson develops into one of the better pass rushers in the 2024 NFL draft. But then there's another reality where he isn't. Let me think of the best way to put this. He has great explosive ability, but he is a guy with historically short arms, a very small wingspan, and that is going to be a little thing of if he doesn't have a consistently good get off and plan as a rusher, there are going to be times where he gets stuck as a pass rusher because offensive tackles are only going to get bigger, stronger, and longer at the next level, right? So that is the little bit of the gamble of Chop could develop that because if he just moves to the repertoire and has better hand play at the top of a track and he has that explosiveness, he can win. He can win some reps. There's no doubt about it. The thing that I'm worried about is if he doesn't develop that enough and he just relies on his pure explosiveness, that's where guys get stuck. That's where Aaron Maben happens, right? Where you're like, Aaron Maben had every physical tool in the toolbox except didn't know how to play the position and wasn't good enough at playing the technical side of the position. So at 21, was rich for my blood, full transparency. Like it was much too rich for my blood, but I get it, right? There was a run on edges. You saw obviously Indianapolis Colts kick it off with Leatu Latu, then Jared Verse goes to the LA Rams. And so you saw a little bit that edge run start to happen. So I get it, but ultimately it is a boomer bust pick. You have to hope that Miami has the coaches in place and the development in place to get the most out of Chop. If they do, he has a lot of upside, but he is
Yeah.
one of, if you ask me who are the couple boomer bust picks in the first round, I would say Chop is one of them. He could be very
Yeah.
good, impactful pass rusher, or he could be a guy that struggles to consistently win the corner against longer, stronger athletes. It's going to be interesting to watch.
You said something key there, as long as you got guys with development and, Anthony Weaver, who we brought over from Baltimore. I mean, you saw what he did with Justin Matabuki in that defensive line.
Yep.
And then we've got a guy like Austin Clark in place, right? Who not only had ties to Newton, but you've seen what he turned Christian Wilkins into. You know what I mean? Zach Sealers turned into a guy who was a UDFA cast away from Baltimore into what he is right now. So kind of like with another pick here we'll get into, we've got guys in the trenches that are proven on the defensive side with the developmental and the growth aspect of it. Sticking with the edge for a sec, there was a second where we thought either Jared Verse or Dallas Turner was going to make it to 21. Never mind Chop Robinson. Were you shocked at how late Dallas Turner went?
I was a little bit, because that was one of the two. If there was two, if you would have asked me before the draft, the most likely Atlanta Falcons pick at 8, I would have said Dallas Turner or the first corner off the board, maybe Quinyon Mitchell. Like, that would have been my 2 picks. Quarterback was just not in that conversation, right? So I thought Dallas Turner had the potential to be the first edge off the board, and I thought it could have happened as early as number 8 to the Atlanta Falcons. So yeah, because what did we just talk about? Chop Robinson. You always bet on traits, right? And typically the NFL does, and Dallas Turner has as much traits as anybody in this draft on the edge. I mean, he's got 34 plus inch arms. He's a 4.4 athlete. He's got 40 plus inch vert, and he had a pretty productive final year at Alabama, had 10 sacks. So I thought that some team was going to draft him really early. So him being there at 17 was a little shocking to me. It was a little bit shocking to me. And it was honestly really shocking to me, because I thought Latu was going to not fall, but I thought he was going to drop back a few slots just because of the medicals, making some teams uneasy. Him being the first edge off the board was actually very surprising to me. I thought it was going to be Dallas Turner.
Wasn't it the same was Jalen Phillips the first edge off the board in that class?
He was. I'm pretty sure that was not a great edge class. So I think Jalen was like
it was like him and
best
BJ
guy.
Ojolari were like the 2 best guys in that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So what would you say to Dolphin fans then, who they have PTSD from us trading up for Dion Jordan, they have PTSD from Charles Harris? What would you say? Now we can both agree Charles Harris ain't in this. When you talk about traits, the way you're talking about, Charles Harris ain't in the stratosphere that Chop's in terms of the traits you're talking about.
Right.
But what would you say to fans who have PTSD from trading up for Dion Jordan, which I think was not only a different GM, we traded up like in the top 5. It's a way different situation. Yep. What would you say to fans who say, "Oh, Dion Jordan 2.0 or Charles Harris 2.0"?
I mean, everybody's their own guy, right? Their own player at the end of the day, right? So yeah, I think the Charles Harris one, we could just throw that out immediately. I mean, Charles Harris, we knew it was a reach at the time, but Charles Harris was an effort player, right? Like, he was a motor guy. He's going to win off of just nonstop to the whistle. And that was kind of how he was going to win. He wasn't an incredibly explosive athlete. He wasn't a guy that was going to win just with pure first step and that explosiveness around the track. So he's a completely different talent, right? Ultimately, Dion Jordan is an interesting one, because Dion, obviously, Dolphins move up for him. It was a weak draft at the top, at least the perceived top 5 to 10 in that class, right? That was a little bit of a weaker class. So I think that they gambled off the traits there, but ultimately Dion Jordan was a boomer bust pick, but it also was a boomer bust pick where you made a move up to go get him, right? So if I'm a Dolphins fan, I'm much more willing to do a boomer bust at 21 than I am as a top 5 pick ultimately, right? So at worst, if you miss on it, it sucks. But at least you can tell yourself, I stayed put in the 20s and I took a gamble on a guy that has a lot of traits. I didn't mortgage draft capital and my future development of my rooms for a guy that was a boomer bust pick in the top 5. So I think that's the best way to put it for Miami fans to be able to just kind of come to terms with it and be okay with it. You gambled on a kid in the 20s, not a kid in the top 5, and wasted draft capital on it.
The second pick of the Dolphins draft, Patrick Paul out of Houston. We actually started the second run on tackles on day 2 with that pick, right? Now, I thought, I had a couple guys who I had graded higher still on the board. Kingsley Suamatea, who I had higher graded than him. Same with Roger Rosengarten. I had
I love Roger, man. I
Yeah,
love
I had
Roger
him.
Rosengarten. Yeah.
I had him graded higher. You know what I mean? And I think, hey, okay, you got Jackson at right tackle. You could kick Rosengarten into right guard and you're set to go, I think. And we got Eichenberg and Jack Driscoll battling for that. So where's the pain in that, right? What are your thoughts on the Patrick Paul pick? Because again, I think this goes back to what you said in the first one. You better have a guy in the trenches that can develop and coach. Because see, I see people saying, "Oh, Patrick Paul's got slow feet." I don't see slow feet. I see quick feet with clunky footwork. That's what I see. Same as what I saw with Austin Jackson. You got quick feet, but your footwork is absolute trash and needs to be coached up. And it's not on you; it's on the coaching. That it's probably let's be honest. Our University of Houston known for refining tackles. You know what I mean? But you talk about the length that you were talking about earlier. You talk about the size. You talk about the power. This man can straight up bully. I got a couple issues with him. Sure, he can get to see. That's why I don't believe in the slow feet, because I've seen reps where he gets to that second level quick. My problem is when he gets to the second level, sir, you have to find work more often when you get to the second level. And I will say this. Reps are littered all over the all-22 of him getting away with holds like you wouldn't believe. Well, bro, if you could already learn how to do it and get away with it, translate it, baby, because you're using the length. Well, what are your thoughts on the Patrick Paul pick? Because as you know, this is probably Teron Armstead's last year. You can probably agree with what you saw in film. It's probably what I saw in film. Guard is no bueno for this man at his size and the leverage game. Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts on the Patrick Paul pick? Where we took him, 55. What are your thoughts on Patrick Paul? And he's probably gonna have now. Does he have 1 year to rest, or does he fill in for the 6 to 7 games Teron Armstead's known to miss every year? Or would you let Kendall Lamb play and just keep developing Patrick Paul and let him loose in year 2? What are your thoughts on the Paul pick, and how would you develop him in year 1?
So I feel like we see him very similarly. There were all you mentioned Kingsley Suamatea, you mentioned Roger Rosengarten. I had both those guys rated higher than Patrick Paul. I mean, just flat out, right? So the value part, I think, if I'm Notre Dame fans or people that like to do film also in evaluating the prospects of their team's draft, there were a couple guys that I would have valued higher at that position. It was also kind of weird because I felt like Roger Rosengarten was perfect for Miami's scheme too. Like if we're still an outside zone heavy approach, it's kind of perfect for what a Roger Rosengarten brings to the table. But I guess that's a conversation for a different day.
Do you think he could have kicked? Do you think Rosengarten could have kicked the left tackle, or would have just kept him on the right? You think you would have?
I think he could have done either one. I've compared him to Mitchell Schwartz, so I think that he's going to be a stellar right tackle on the NFL level as long as he's put in a good position. But I think that he has more than enough foot quickness to be able to kick over to left tackle. Like I don't think that's a problem. But I also think that we see Patrick Paul very similarly in the sense of there's no questioning the kid has crazy length, the kid's very strong, the kid's played a lot of football, and I think the foot quickness is good NFL caliber foot quickness. It's the bend that gets me worried, man. He just doesn't bend well through the hips. He plays very upright. The weird thing is, a guy that is 6'7" plus and 330 pounds, you wouldn't expect him to struggle against power as a rusher, but that is where he has his struggles because he lacks leverage as a pass protector and he plays too high. So guys can get inside on his chest. They can get underneath his pads a little bit. And that's also an issue in the run game a little bit right now, right? Where it's just when he makes instant contact, guys are just lower than him. So they can establish better leverage in the run game as well. You need to be able to help with that flexibility, but you also need to be able to help with the consistent footwork and approach to how to play the game. There are clearly building blocks there. Building blocks. There's no reason that from a talent perspective, he can't be a starting NFL offensive tackle, but I think there's going to be a maturation process that needs to happen here. And it's a great question and a great debate. Do you throw the kid to the fire when the first opportunity comes? You mentioned Teron Armstead maybe getting banged up for a few games. It's been the MO on him. Do you throw him out there and let him fail a little bit and let him come out on the other side? Or do you make this a redshirt year? I think that both of them have legitimacy. I would strive more towards letting him watch in the year one, right? Like
Mm.
I want him to work with a strength and conditioning staff to increase the flexibility. I want him working with a good offensive line coach every single day in practice to help with his footwork, his aiming points, and his hand play. If you do all that, I think you could have a starting offensive tackle in year 2 to year 3. I think that's very possible, but I do think it needs to be a slow burn of a maturation process because there are things that technically and just from a bend perspective and flexibility perspective, there are things that obviously need to be improved. But at pick 55, again, you're a late second round pick. You're taking a gamble on traits. I will never hate on a team for taking a gamble on traits. I probably would have picked somebody different at the position of need, but ultimately Patrick Pearl has all the tools to be a good starter in the NFL. It's just going to be about, again, developments. We always come back to development in this conversation.
So let me ask you this. As an evaluator, just the first 2 picks before we get into day 3, we've really talked about guys who traits and need developments. We haven't talked about any sure bets between Chop and Patrick. If you were a Dolphins fan, would you be discouraged about that?
Oh man, I guess it's your opinion on your coach, right? I mean, because my thing is that yeah, it might not be quick fixes, but also it could help the sustainability long term, right? So if you're in on Mike McDaniel and you think that you're going to be your guy for the next 7 to 8 years, whatever the heck he ends up coaching with Miami, then I think you're completely fine with it, man. Because ultimately you're going to bet on getting talented dudes in the room and letting your coach figure it out. But if you're down on Mike McDaniel for whatever reason, right, then you're kind of like, well, how are we going to win a Super Bowl in 2024 with a couple guys that maybe aren't going to help us in year one, right? So I really think it's your perspective, honestly. Again, would there be a couple guys that I would have picked in, just kind of looking back on it in hindsight and say that it probably would have helped you more in year one? For sure. But I do think that it really depends on your perspective of Mike McDaniel. If you're sold on him, you're saying it's not just about 2024 bust. 2024, we're going to have a shot. 2025, we're going to have a shot. 2026, we're going to have a shot. It's about sustainability if that is the approach you're taking.
Okay, I like that. That's a good answer. All right, day 3 started off for the Dolphins where we all thought we'd be sitting back there, but we ended up trading. We got 2 compensatory picks from Robert Hunt and Christian Wilkins leaving, and for next year in the 3rd round. So we traded our 1/3 round that we could, because we would have had 3, and we moved up to 120, and we took Jaylen Wright, running back. I mean, I believe I talked about this with you about the possibility of them taking a running back and stuff on day 3. Well, what are your thoughts on them moving up to take Jaylen Wright, who he's like a top 75 player in this draft, and they got him at 120, and now you're adding that into the room with Devin Achane and Raheem Mostert to an offense that now has Odell Beckham Jr., Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Jonnu Smith. Yep. What are your thoughts on the Jaylen Wright pick from value to the player?
I mean, it's the most Miami Dolphin pick of all time, is it not? I mean, how many? I mean, literally, like joking for a second here. How many teams can say that their 3rd fastest running back in a room runs a 4.38, right? Like, it's kind of ridiculous to think about. I mean, literally, he is the fastest running back in this class, Jaylen Wright, and one of the fastest running backs to come out of the last couple of years. And he's probably 3rd in a race of running backs in Miami's room behind Mostert and Achane, right? So It's ridiculous to think about. Now, that being said, I think it's value for one because I think that Miami capitalized off of there being a fall of running backs in this class. I didn't expect one to get picked until the late 2nd round. I think the first one came off in like the 40-something range with Brooks, right? And then obviously Trey Benson fell a little bit. So I think they found value because the running back board just kind of fell down a little bit. I did think that the NFL would value Wright higher than that, than the 120s, because again, I mean, you can't teach speed, right? You can't teach speed. He's very productive, especially his last year at Tennessee. He was productive in 2022 as well. He's got some pass catching upside, although it's something that I still wish that they would have utilized more at Tennessee, but I think he has that layer to him. But he's a perfect fit for the offense, right? I mean, at the end of the day, running backs, there's the special ones, right? The Saquon Barkleys of the world, the Christian McCaffreys, who in most situations can be productive, right? And can be really good players. But then for the most part, running back is so dictated on situation. So you're telling me that a guy that is perfect for an outside zone system and has 4.38 speed now gets to work with Mike McDaniel's offense? cool, man. Like, that's great. And I just think that you're loading up for the future because Raheem Mostert is getting a little bit older, right? And
Yeah.
I know he's coming off of a career year, but he's been a guy that's historically been banged up. And Devin A-Chain missed a few games in 2023 as well with injuries. So I think that you have a very talented room, a lot of speed. My only concern would be, do you have, and it's a little bit different because Jaylen Wright's 210 pounds. So it's not like he's a mighty mouse with a couple of the other guys that they are. But I do wonder if, do you have a little too much of the same type in the room, if that makes sense, right? But ultimately, in the 120s, to get a guy that fits your system perfectly, I would be surprised if Jaylen Wright plays in year one, or Jaylen Wright, excuse me. If he plays in year one, I would be super surprised if he wasn't very productive in that outside zone heavy system.
Yeah, like I've talked to some people, and there's some expectations that he could take Raheem Mostert's job by the end of it, and it could be the Wright A-Chan show by like November, right? You know what I mean?
Which is crazy to say because you're talking about a guy in Mostert that, again, I know he's been banged up and he's been a little bit of a journeyman when you look at his entirety of his career, but just led the league in touchdowns last year. Did he not? Like, I mean, he just had a really good season. So it's a testament.
It's what you said, bro. It's what you said. We're now 2 years deep where come December and January football, Mostert can't stay healthy.
Yep.
Right. And that's an issue because you know what it is. You need in the playoffs, you need to run the football. Like, you know that you're not winning playoff games without running the football. That's just what it is.
Yep.
Another potential steal at 158. I didn't think he'd be. There's no way I thought he'd be off the board. I thought he'd be gone in the first 105 picks. Mohamed Kamara, edge, Colorado State. He's come out and he said he's angry where he got picked. He's legitimately not happy with where he got picked. Now it's our rotation is like I said to you, Chubb. He is not going to be around probably till at least November, and then he's coming back from his injury. He might not even be the same.
Right.
You know how it is, 2 years usually to recover from those type of injuries.
Sure.
And then, so now your rotation is probably going to be Shaq Barrett, Jalen Phillips, Chop Robinson, Mohamed Kamara. What are your thoughts on Mohamed Kamara and the draft pick and where they got him? And is this I never actually asked you, were you high on him?
I liked him a lot. Yeah, I liked him as a top 150 type of player, a guy that I think could have snuck into maybe even late day two potentially because he rode the draft process, man. Obviously, he had a great combine. I know he went to East West and had a really good week out there. So he's been a riser, and he quietly led college football in sacks, I believe, this past year as well. So he just had a tremendous year. Like, there's no doubt about it. Actually, I think he maybe finished second behind the kid at Utah, whatever his name is, Ellis.
Oh, John Ellis.
Yeah, his name was escaping me. But he brings, and I think it's a great fit into that room because he has a lot of similar characteristics. He tested better than this young man, but a lot of similar characteristics to Shaq Barrett's, who, again, wasn't the most dynamic athletes coming out of college, but stand-up rusher, lightly built, not the tallest dude of all time. He kind of fits the modern stand-up role that you're seeing in the NFL right now. You know, Bryce Huff just got paid a lot of money from the Eagles this past offseason, coming over from the Jets, another lightly built stand-up rusher, kind of in the vein of a Shaq Barrett. So having Shaq Barrett in that room to tutor a guy like Kamara, I think is a very good thing to have because Kamara brings really good nuance to the position. He plays with good hands. He's explosive. He's smaller. So there's going to be some limitations as far as maybe playing on early downs, early on especially, but in a edge group that you already talked about is injured and battered going into the season, having a guy that can potentially give you some early significant impact on obvious passing situations, I think at pick number 158 or whatever the heck he was, like that's tremendous value, I think, in that spot.
Malik Washington. Some people are viewing this as one of the steals of the draft at 184. What are your thoughts on Malik Washington?
I thought he was going to go higher. I did. I was surprised to see him in the 6th round at pick 184. I was really surprised. There was a couple wide receivers. Like, I didn't dislike Aeneas Smith that came out of Texas A&M, for instance. I thought he was fine, but like
Malik's better though.
Malik's better. Yeah, and they're gonna fill a similar role. You know, they're kind of that gadget slot type who break a lot of tackles, work after the catch. They're kind of similar style of players. But I like Malik better. I mean, I just flat out too.
He's a baller, bro.
He was underrated at Northwestern. He played in an awful offense that couldn't pass the
Oh, the
football.
quarterback play. Oh my
So bad.
God.
So bad.
Oh.
And what a job by him to bet on himself his 1 year at Virginia and be a grad transfer, because he went on to have 100+ catches, over 1,000 yards.
And the quarterback play wasn't that much better. Let me
No, not much. Better than Northwestern the year before, though. There's no doubt about that. So, yeah, he had a tremendous year. I like it in Miami's system, especially because it's easy, right? As far as the West Coast implement, getting the ball out in space, drags, overs, like all that type of stuff, right? Throwing the screen game, like that's easy, right? But I think the big thing that you miss on it a little bit, or not miss, but I think it's a different layer to it, is Tyreek Hill can break some tackles, but he is still that super quick-footed space dude, right? To make guys miss in space. Jaylen Waddle, kind of the same thing. Neither one of those guys are dense. I know Tyreek's got a little bit of denseness to him, former running back early on in his college career, but like still, he's more of a quickness-based player.
Malik's like 191, right?
Malik is dense, man.
Yeah.
He's physical. So they all do the same thing in terms of winning after the catch, creating extra yardage, creating explosive plays, but they each do it in a different way, which I think is very important. I don't want guys that are cookie cutters all the time. I want to create a receiver room that's different. So Malik has shown the ability to win through contact at the catch point a little bit. He's got pretty strong hands overall, but this kid as a dense, physical after catch dude, I was actually watching a couple offensive linemen they have for the 2025 class, and it's always hilarious because you're watching a couple guys and your eyes kind of gravitate towards others, right? And of course, I'm watching Virginia offensive lineman, and then I see myself just kind of gravitating towards number 4 again, right? Because Malik is just so much fun in that offense. So I think he's the mold that you guys like, but also different at winning in that mold, if that makes sense.
And you know what I'm excited to? What we talked about. He's never had a quarterback like Tua. Think of all the yards you watched at Northwestern and Virginia being left on the field because he couldn't get thrown into space, right? Now you're going to actually see him get thrown into space, because we're going to talk about Tahj after we talk about McMorris here. But the two things I love about that, the one thing I love that Tahj and Malik have in common, and you especially see in Tahj, is they got it up here too, bro. Like they are smart players after the catch. You know what I mean? Like in terms of taking angles and stuff. Now Patrick McMorris, I'm gonna be honest with you. I hadn't watched him. Now I had 3 guys who I liked better than him. Trey Taylor was still on the board, who I liked better. Josh Proctor was still on the board, who I liked better. And there was someone else on the board who I was like, yeah, I like him better. I gotta look that up. But McMorris, I hadn't watched him. I gone back and watched him, and I was like, you know what I mean? Oh, Bo Braid from Maryland was still on the board, and I liked him better. Because I think Mustafa was gone by that point. What are your thoughts on the McMorris pick? Because again, like I would have taken Trey Taylor every day and twice on Sunday over this kid. What are your thoughts on Patrick McMorris?
It was a little bit of a wild roller coaster evaluation process for Patrick McMorris, because in 2021, I actually recommended him to an agent after the 2021 season at San Diego State. I thought he was tremendous in 2021. 2022 happened, was not very good. A lot of missed tackles, was inconsistent. It was not a great year for him.
So I watched the wrong year tape is what you're telling me. I gotta go back to
2021, man. 2021 is good film.
Okay,
it's
I gotta
good
go
film
back
for
then.
McMorris.
Okay.
Obviously, he decided not to go into the draft in the 2023 cycle, went back and grad transferred to Cal. Now, I didn't do a deep dive on the Cal film. I did not. I only watched about one game
impressive.
because it was late in the process, and I'd already watched some film on him in the past, so I kind of felt like I had a good opinion of him as far as like what the best of what he could be. So I think you're just hoping that he is a more consistent version of himself that we saw in 2022. And from the sounds of it, it may not have popped at Cal this past year, but he was more consistent than when he was at San Diego State. Because I'm telling you, man, if you could find a more consistent version of the 2021 player that I saw at San Diego State, that's an NFL football player. Like, there's no doubt. I mean, he has no problem sticking his nose in there. He's pretty good in short zone. I never saw him as a player that was going to make a ton of plays from depth, like a true free safety type, but a split zone safety that can rotate down, can play some alley, do those types of things. I think he has upside in that regard, right? But at the end of the day, we're talking about a 6th-round player where, if he sticks on special teams and he's a okay backup, that's fine. It's totally fine, right? So I hope you're betting on the special teams upside and the sticking point conversation. And hopefully, again, if you get the best of what he was at San Diego State at spurts, then you might find value. But it's just a little bit of a gamble, obviously, there on day 3.
What do you think about Tahj Washington at 241? Because, I talked about this with Malik, and the one thing that sticks out to me, right, when you watch so many times Caleb Williams is getting out of structure for no reason whatsoever, but every time he does get out of structure, you see Tahj knowing to flow to him. You see Tahj finding the soft spots, getting open, and then taking the right angle and just getting yards after the catch and racking them up. Now, he obviously doesn't have the home run speed that the other guys in this receiving core have.
Right.
The long speed, you know what I mean? And he doesn't have that dense structure you're talking about that Malik has, because he's about 174-ish or something like that. Yep. What are your thoughts on the Tahj Washington pick at 241?
He's one of those guys that kind of grew on you at USC because he was just kind of, he was part of the rotation. But then this year, quietly had 1,000 yards and was the most dependable targeting. Everyone fell in love with Brendan Rice, but I did not love Brendan Rice's film out of USC this year.
Yeah,
I did not. And then there were a guy like Mario Williams who went back to school that I thought were pretty bad this year for USC. I didn't think their wide receivers overall played incredibly well for Caleb Williams in 2023, but Tahj Washington did. He was the dependable guy. And because he does all the things right. You mentioned it already, man. Technically, he comes off the line well, understands how to have clean releases. He finds soft spot in zones. He's a dependable pass catcher. There's nothing dynamic about him, right? As far as he isn't a tall dude. He isn't a physically imposing dude. He isn't the most explosive, dynamic receiver. But he's one of those guys that, he's probably just going to stick in the NFL because he's a solid 4th or 5th receiver, and he just keeps making a roster because he does the little things right, ultimately. Yeah. So I thought he was going to get picked a round earlier, probably somewhere in the 6th round comparative to the 7th. But at the end of the day, Miami finding a potential value late in the draft and in a wide receiver friendly offense, obviously that Mike McDaniel has there, he's a chance to stick. I don't think that you're ever going to see him be a number 1 or number 2 receiver, but if he finds in the right spot and he develops for the next couple of years, if he's a low end wide receiver 3 on a team, I wouldn't be shocked, man. He does everything well enough that he should be able to stick on a roster.
Let me ask you this. I know you're a bit of a betting man, especially when it comes to the draft. Any better's chance Chop Robinson or Jaylen Wright could be rookies of the year for their offensive or defensive classes?
Jaylen Wright's really interesting. Now, obviously, the rookie of the year stuff is typically a quarterback award, right, on offense. But obviously,
I'm not betting on Bo Nix though. So,
well, I'm sure Caleb Williams is the heavy favorite right now. I would assume at this point, right? So, I think that he is the most. I think he's a sneaky pick, right? I don't know what the odds are on him. I don't know. I don't know. It's probably plus 5,000 or something like that. It's probably something crazy at this point, right? But I think that he is an interesting player because, again, it only takes one injury, and he has a Devin A-Chain type of rookie year where it's he averages 8 yards a carry because he's just perfect for the offensive system, right? So Wright would be an interesting kind of sleeper pick for that type of award because, again, if one injury happens, would it be the craziest thing if Jaylen Wright has 1,000 yards as a rookie and averages 6 point something yards a carry? I wouldn't be shocked about that if the opportunity comes.
Now, getting into the UDFA class a bit, there were some guys you had watched. I believe you had said you had watched Mark Perry.
Yes.
What are your and you had watched Storm Duck as well. What are your thoughts on those 2 secondary options?
So Mark Perry is an interesting one. You know what I kind of said about Patrick McMorris as far as being a physical kid that will come down in the box, could play split zone and do enough as far as an athlete.
Yeah.
Mark Perry's kind of the same way, right? Like there's nothing that pops on Mark Perry athletically. Like I'm not going to ask him to play single high free safety and play middle of the field to sideline. Like you're never going to do that type of stuff. But like he was quietly productive for TCU over the last couple of years. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if he makes a roster as a special teams player or maybe even just a practice squad opportunity because he played some good ball. And again, he's not a dynamic player. He's not a guy that I don't think he's a starter ultimately down the line, even if he's developed properly. But making a roster, it's always possible. It's always possible with a guy like Mark Perry. Storm Duck's a cool name, right? And everyone's gonna lose their mind in the preseason about his name being Storm Duck, which is pretty hilarious, right? But he just lacks so much consistency. He's a pretty talented kid as far as like he's physical, he's got some decent length to him. I mean, he's a press man type of corner, but just a little bit tight in the hips and a little bit of a very inconsistent player. I thought early on in his career when he was at North Carolina, like I thought Storm Duck and Tony Grimes Jr., who's back in college again for the 9th year, I thought they were going to be pretty good, both of them, but just never seemed to really take that next step. But he obviously has some size and length, length measurables to work with, hopefully.
Now the Dolphins, they clearly need interior help. Have you had a chance to watch Andrew Meyer from UTEP and Matthew Jones from Ohio State?
I didn't get to Meyer from UTEP, but I did watch Matthew Jones. So Matthew Jones is a consistent player who has clearly been coached pretty well, right? Because he seems like he's always in a proper body positioning. He has pretty good hand play. His aiming points are good in the run game for the most part. He's just very clunky, man. Like he just is not a good mover. He's very tight. I mean, he's not a guy that's going to redirect well in space all the time. So he's a little bit of a weird fit for Miami, to be honest with you. Like I much more would have been a heavy gap approach than a heavy zone approach, like or a outside zone approach. I didn't think that would necessarily be the best fit for him, but he's played a lot of football. And I know you know this as a Dolphins fan, right? There's not enough good offensive linemen in the NFL. So, like, I'm never going to count a guy from sticking that's played so many games as what a Matthew Jones did at Ohio State because that matters, right? The experience matters and all those things matter. The technical refinement matters. So I'd be surprised if he made the roster for Miami, but I wouldn't be shocked necessarily. I think he does have an uphill battle, though.
One UTEP player you did watch, Gavin Hardison. Say it. I know you ain't gonna say what you said, but say it nicer this time.
All right. Here's the best way to put it. He's a doofus. Okay. I mean, he doesn't know what reason. He is. Everyone throws the word gunslinger out, right? Let's say what gunslinger really means. Gunslinger means that you think that you can make every single throw, even when you shouldn't make it, right? And that's Gavin Hardison. Like, just so many throws where you're just like, bro. No, don't do that. Don't do that like that ever. No. But even the ones that you're just like, that is a stupid decision. Throws a beautiful ball, man. The ball comes out
deep touch is pretty good. Yeah.
Man, he's got pace to his football, man. Like there's a natural arm talent there. He's a kid that is not going to make the roster more than likely. Well, he's not going to make the roster.
Skylar Thompson is safe for everyone.
Skylar Thompson's safe. He's not going to make Miami. He's going to get a cup of coffee, just a nice look in the NFL. And he's probably going to go to one of the alternate. He's probably going to go to UFL, right? Yeah. And he's probably going to make a roster and he might even play at some point as an alternative league quarterback.
Breathe the Brett Favre of the UFL.
I'll say this, man. You guys are going to go out to a Miami practice and you're going to watch him throw in shorts and be like, that looks pretty good. I like it. The ball's coming out nice. But then when the team drills come or the 7-on-7 comes, and you're gonna be like, oh,
the head smack
again. The
collective head smack. Did you have a chance? Okay, so my favorite UDFA they added. I know you probably had a chance to watch him because of Latu and his twin brother, Grayson Murphy. I mean, you're talking about one of the guy who had some of the most pressures in college football over the last few years. What are your thoughts on, because I think the names we've gone over, Grayson Murphy, given what we've talked about, our edge depth this year, Grayson Murphy actually has a chance to make the 53, I think, here. What are your thoughts on him?
So he and I did watch a lot of Grayson Murphy because obviously his twin brother Gabriel was also a very good player for UCLA, and you
had him in my top 15
already.
Yeah.
I mean he's look.
Gabriel, I had in my top 15.
Yeah. Well, Grayson for me is a guy that went very underrated in this class because again, he played with a couple He played with a top 15 pick, and then he played Gabriel, who is a very talented athlete in his own right? Like went to the combine, ran 4.6s, and he's a good athlete overall. He unfortunately has the same hurdles that his brother has, though, is that he has historically short arms, a very small wingspan, and he's a little bit of a tweener. Like, he played, obviously, he's an outside pass rusher, he's a stand-up rusher, but he might be a guy that also needs to play a little bit off ball at times, right? Like, maybe he's a Sam backer at points that also can come up and play on the line of scrimmage. But either way, he's going to have to play special teams. He's going to have to. He obviously has the traits. He has the explosiveness. He has the motor to be a good special teamer, especially with the importance now that you have in kick coverage with the kickoff rule getting changed. So I think he has a chance to find it, right? It's just going to be about, if you're Miami, you're Anthony Weaver, you need to be, if he makes the roster and let's say he plays, if he works himself in the rotation, I think you have to have a very specific role for a player like that. Because I don't think he's a full-time edge all the time. I don't think he's a full-time linebacker. He's got to be kind of a hybrid rusher, outside linebacker. So being able to have a plan for him, I think is going to be key for a guy like Grayson Murphy.
You said the key word there, hybrid. I mean, that's what Anthony Weaver likes, is hybrid guys, right? So overall, your thoughts on the Dolphins draft class and UDFA class?
I think that they took big swings on athletes early, or athletic traits early, which again, don't have anything against it. But it is the reality that we're looking at. The first two selections they had are boomer bust picks, right? It's going to be all about development. After that, I think they found a lot of great value in this draft. I mean, we mentioned Jaylen Wright in the 4th round. You mentioned Malik Washington in the 6th. Like, there was a lot of value in this draft in the key parts of the draft, because people always hyper focus on the 1st round picks, the 2nd round picks, and for good reason. I get why, right? Because those are the guys that are the clearest bet to come in and help a team early on. But ultimately, a team is built through day 3 UDFA picks. That is who makes up the bulk of these rosters, right? So I think Miami found value in those spots, and you need to hope that a guy like Anthony Weaver can get the most out of a guy like a Chop Robinson. You got to hope your offensive line coach can get the most out of Patrick Paul. The success of this class is going to hinder on development at the top. If you're able to develop at the top, I think you found tremendous value through the bulk of the draft, so it ends up being a very successful class. But the boomer bust at the top is going to determine just how good this class is.
Appreciate it. Let the people know where they can find you and your latest work that you got coming, Ryan.
Yeah, well, hopefully I have a pretty cool announcement coming soon as far as job stuff. So just follow me at Rise and Draft on Twitter, like Shake and Bake, Rise and Draft. And any announcements I have there, any content I'm throwing out there. We also do the First Team NFL Draft and College Football podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. If you guys want to hear early summer scouting, we did a overview last week. We're going to be talking interior defensive line this week on the podcast as well. So make sure to follow the show, and appreciate you for having me on, man.
Appreciate you coming on, man. Always a good time.
Yes,
and
sir.
guys, smash the like button, subscribe if you're new. I hope you enjoyed the content, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Until then, fins up, go Fins, whatever your taste is. Take it easy, guys.